Now, one thing that happened, I wanted to bring to your attention to a US congressman, when it was brought up, he's from California and a Democrat. It was brought up, he's on the oversight committee, and they brought up the weapons ending up in the hands of terrorists in Ukraine. And they said, we need some accounting. And he threw back, this is just Russian disinformation. So I'm going to bring in Dan Kovalik, who's a professor at the International Human Rights Law School and University of Pittsburgh and an author. He also spoke at the UN about this issue. Dan, thank you. And would you kind of elaborate on what I just laid out there for that attitude that came from the US Congress, particularly the Democratic wing?
Yeah, I mean, these allegations are not coming, from Russia. They're coming from mainstream US sources, and so the presentation that I gave, which you helped me with, Tara, was based on things like CBS News, which did a documentary on this. As you said, the head of Interpol warned that these weapons would end up in the hands of terrorists. As late as November 1 of this year, so about 6 weeks ago, the Washington Post reported that the US government had only inspected about 10% of all the weapons we had sent to Ukraine, that we only had a handle on where 10% of the weapons have gone. Other sources like CNN also did a story, I believe back in April, saying that, look, we don't have a handle on where these weapons are going. It's impossible for us to have a handle on it, especially because Ukraine has been a place where arms have been easily trafficked within and through since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's a very corrupt country. It's the most corrupt country in Europe. And again, back in April, they were predicting that this would be a big problem. And they quoted various US officials saying, look, we have no way to get on top of this. And again, many months go on. November, we're into November, and already they admit we've only looked at about 10% of where these weapons.
And they have talked about the Nazi problem in Ukraine. And the BBC knows about it because they were airbrushing the insignia off the photos before releasing them in articles. So this is not like the West doesn't know. In fact, there were articles, right, Dan, and you and I have talked about this just recently, before they decided Ukraine is just, full of angels and there's no Nazis, right? But a few years before, there were many articles in mainstream media talking about the problem of nationalists and Nazis, carrying out atrocities in Donbass, correct?
Well, yes. And in fact, let me tell you something. Here's some evidence that people forget about. A number of years ago, Congressman John Conyers from Detroit, he's not a congressman there anymore. He hasn't been for a few years. So this was quite a while ago. Actually sponsored a bill in Congress that got passed and signed by Obama, outlawing or saying it was illegal for the U.S. to arm Nazis in Ukraine. Well, why did he feel a need to do that if there's no Nazis and the U.S. wasn't arming them? Even worse, shortly after that, Congress had a change of heart and repealed that bill. Okay, so they went out of their way, and Obama signed the repeal saying, oh, no, it's okay if the U.S. arms Nazis in Ukraine. So again, why these two bills that are passed if there's no Nazis, right? And as you say, if you look at articles, if you can find them, by the way, they're harder to find on Google because of their algorithm. They suppress these articles. But between 2014 and the beginning of the special operations, you could find a number of articles, a number of human rights organization reports talking about Nazis, neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And you had there's a great quote from the very well-respected former president of Uruguay, Pepe Mujica, who said you can't even call them neo-Nazis. They're just straight up Nazis, right? That have existed in Ukraine since the 1920s, in which the U.S. has kept alive since World War II in order to counter, at first, the Soviet Union. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. kept supporting them to try to undermine Russia. Again, all of this is a matter of fact. It's a matter of history, and yet now it's being denied. I mean, the other thing which has to be pointed out, and this is all part and parcel of this, is the rewriting of history. Who won World War II? Right? Well, first of all, you had people like President Reagan who went to Germany and visited a war cemetery, which had a bunch of Nazis buried there. And he suggested that we were always on the same side as Germany, right? And so you had this historical rewriting of history, and a big part of that is denying the role of the Soviet Union in defeating the Nazis, right?
27 million people, yeah.
Yeah, which everyone in the West knew was a fact, but as time has gone on, that's been denied, et cetera. Why is that important? Because now, they try to claim that, it's Putin that's the fascist, right? And that he's the one imposing fascism, and then the people in Ukraine are fighting fascism. Well, again, it's all part of the historical revision.